Welcome to Skin Deep here on Sirius XM Radio, Channel 141, HUR Voices. I'm your host, Sharon Morton. And my guest today is someone who I've admired for many years. She's my Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated sister, Karen Williams Gooden, an attorney, author, and historian dedicated to preserving African American history through both her public service and extensive genealogical research. Karen has held key roles in law and public administration, including Associate County Attorney for Prince George's County, Maryland, and Assistant Secretary for the Maryland Department of Transportation. Over 4 decades, Karen has authored works such as Across Born and Like a Phoenix, I'll Rise, which are used in Prince George's County schools. Her latest book, written this year, 2025, is called They Came Across Saltwater: Faith of Our Mothers and Fathers, a history of an African American family. It traces her African American family's journey from West Africa through U.S. history. So, as I always say, we're going to be doing more than just scratching the surface. Here on Skin Deep, we're talking all about the resilience and legacy of African American families. And by the way, if you want to reach out, as always, email us at skindeepradioshow@gmail.com. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages with information you just can't afford to miss here on Skin Deep. Welcome back to Skin Deep here on Sirius XM Radio, Channel 141, HUR Voices. As I mentioned before the break, I have on the show with me the esteemed Karen Williams Gooden. She's an attorney, author, and historian who has traced her ancestry to figures like Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson, Pocahontas, and Ella Fitzgerald. Welcome to the show, Karen. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for having me. I'm so proud of you, and I'm just grateful for this opportunity to be on your show.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So tell my listeners, Karen, what inspired you to write They Came Across Saltwater: Faith of Our Mothers and Fathers, a history of an African American family. And by the way, thank you for my autographed copy of your wonderful book.
Well, you are welcome, and I thank you because of all your great work and your leadership in the community. So, just a little token for me. But what inspired me actually to do this, Sharon, is in 1976, I entered Howard University, and I was in the class of Dr. J. Colton Hayden. I took Introduction to African American Studies. And Dr. Hayden told us that he wanted each of us to do a genealogical research about our families. A lot of students weren't really pleased about it. They pushed back, something that people didn't do a lot back then. But he said, look, I want you to tell me as much as you can about your family. And a lot of people said, look, I don't even know my dad. I don't know my grandfather. But in my case, I was excited because I could research my history back 6 generations at that time. And so as a result of this class and the paper that I wrote, it became a published article. My professor submitted it to the New Directions magazine, which is the Howard magazine now.
Wow.
And it circulated all over the country. And so that was actually, that article became the basis of this book.
That's wonderful. All those years ago. And this book that you presented, that you've written, that's here now. I mean, that's a long span of time. Tell us, what's the overall purpose of They Came Across Saltwater, and how did you write the book based on what you did? Like, was that 40 years ago, 50 years? I can't even, that's a lot of years ago.
I'm a golden girl. I think it's 46 years ago, to be
Okay,
quite
well,
honest.
girl, you
When
don't
it
even
first
look
started.
you don't even look 46. So
I will cash at you. Thank you for
so
that.
yes.
But listen, what the purpose for the book obviously is to document my own history. But it's bigger than that. A lot of times politicians say this is not about me, but this is kind of about me. But it's also about all of us, because it is a microcosmic view of the African American experience here in the United States. Those of us who are descendants of the Middle Passage, those whom I write about. It also documents the generational trauma and resilience that I think we as a people have encountered, not just my family, but our collective family, Sharon. I mean, we had to endure slavery, Jim Crow, lynching, and of course, we came through the civil rights era. And the other reason that I wrote the book was because it does document and tie us to our various national historic figures like Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. There's a discourse
Mm,
going on and people don't want to talk about it, but this is why we have to document our own history. And then finally, I think the book exposes racial injustice. There's a chapter devoted to a family friend who was lynched. His name was Govan Sweat Ward,
mm,
and Mr. Ward was lynched on July the 30th, 1935. Why do I remember that? Because my grandmother took me back to the lynching tree to where
mm.
Govan Sweat Ward was lynched. My husband took me last summer to the Museum of Justice and Peace, which is where
Mhm.
some 6,000 African Americans, quartins or monuments hang from a ceiling, and their names appear thereon. And I've got to tell you, when I finally reached North Carolina to alphabetize Franklin County, and I saw Govan Sweat Ward's name, I literally dropped to my knees and cried. And I
Oh,
told my grandmother, Grandma, I found Govan. And I told you
mm.
I'd never give up on him. So those are the reasons and the purposes for which I wrote the book. And lastly, I think to celebrate our triumphs and our achievements, because despite what has happened to us and continues to happen to us, we are a resilient people.
That's
Why
right.
your show is so very important.
Yes, very much so. We are resilient. And this book is so very important, especially in today's landscape. We will not allow our history to be erased. So I'm so proud of you for doing this book and so grateful to you for doing this book and bringing this book to fruition so that all of us, especially generations coming behind us, will see and read about the history of your family and other families. How old were you, Karen, when your grandmother took you to that tree where the your
I
family
can.
friend Govan was hanged?
It was 1978. I guess I was 18, 20 years old or something like that. By the time I had met my husband, I really dated myself. I mentioned him because we met on a blind date, and the first question he asked me, he said, "Look, I understand you wrote your family history, and I read it." So I was quite
Ah,
moved and touched by that. I said, "That's going to be
yes,
my husband." And so
yes.
he still is after 42 years, and so but anyway, my grandmother took me back and she said to me and my oldest brother, my mother, and my sister-in-law at the time, she said, "Babe, I want you to go back to where I came from." And I
Mm,
said, "Okay, Grandma." And I would talk to her all the time because she had given me most of the information that became the basis of that article. And she said, "But I'm not going to be with you long." That troubled me. But she took me back to where she had been born to see the house where she had come from and to meet actually some of her white relatives, because again, this is a part of the American story,
of
and this is why
course.
we erase it. And we went to the lynching tree where Govan Sweat Ward was lynched. And you asked me another question about how long had I worked on this and how did I aggregate all of these materials. So over the years, I just continued to collect information. And I tell my daughter, we didn't have cell phones just before on. She said, "What do you mean by that, Mom?" And no social media. So I did it the old fashioned way, the way that I was trained at Howard, looking at census records and keeping articles. And I just kept things. And I'm a historian. My mother was. She was the historian of our church for 55 years. And so I think that trait was passed on to me. And I am a seventh generation griot, and I memorized and took to heart the history of our family. And I kept
Wow.
records of conversations, some handwritten. I have a taped interview of my grandmother from that trip that we took to Franklin County. It's in 1978.
That's amazing, Karen. That is amazing. You're a walking, talking history book of your family. And it's so great to have taped your grandmother. I have tapings of my grandmother too. I was
That's
blessed
wonderful.
enough. Yeah, I was very blessed to know all of my grandmothers and great grandmothers. My great grandmothers, both of them, they didn't die until I was in my 20s. So
That's
I
a
was very
blessing.
blessed. Yeah. And then I just lost my grandmother 2 years ago, and we were very
Sorry to
close.
hear
So
that.
I've gotten lots of tapings from her as well as my mother. That's so very important. So I'm glad you did that. How did you come up with the title of the book? They Came Across Saltwater.
Well, my book deals a lot with my maternal grandparents from a firsthand perspective when my mother was getting her master's from Hampton Institute at the time,
Mm-hmm.
she decided, although had a wonderful father and two wonderful big brothers, that I should come and live with grandma and grandpa in the summer so the grandma could look after me while she was studying.
Yeah.
So I came to live in Washington, D.C. My grandparents were like many African Americans. They had come to D.C. through the second migration. The first one, of course, is from across Saltwater, the Middle
Yeah.
Passage. The second is the trek that many of us took to leave Jim Crow and discrimination and come northward. And so my grandparents moved to 209 Randolph Place, Northeast in Washington, D.C., where I spent many summers. And anyway, so every day my grandfather, Otha Branch was his name, my maternal grandfather, walked a cousin of mine and me to the John F. Kennedy playground every single day for 3 months, Sharon. And
Oh,
then he would walk us to what he called Howard University. He said,
oh,
"This year is the greatest school that God ever made." And I said, "It is." But I was 4, so I really didn't know what
right,
Grandpa was talking
right.
about. And he said, "When y'all children grow up, I want you to go to Howard University." And then
Wow.
finally he said this one day, and he said it repeatedly that summer. And I don't know why I remembered it, but I did. He said, "Baby, I want you to know that my great great grandpappy came from across this salt water." So then I reflected back to my class in Dr. J. Carlton Hayden's class. And this is what he said to us, Sharon. He said, "Listen, students, there are 5 oceans in the world, but the saltiest is the Atlantic. And those of us who are descendants of the Middle Passage came across the salty Atlantic." And I heard Grandpa's voice. They came across salt
Salt
water. So
water.
it's written in his vernacular. I don't dress it up at all. That's how he spoke. Notwithstanding the fact that he was one of 15 children, my great grandparents were born in 1866, one year after Lee surrendered in 1870. They had 15 children, 11 lived to be adults, sent 6 to college. I think that's significant. And most of those folks were born between 1890 and then 1924. Those were my great uncles and aunts. Those were my grandfather's siblings. So he believed in education, and that's where the title came from. The second part, because a lawyer and a historian has to have a long title, and the second part is faith of our mothers and fathers. Now, I tell people we used to sing this song in the Baptist church, Faith of Our Fathers, but nobody's going to write about a history and not talk about her mother.
Mm-hmm.
So it was
That's
the
right.
faith of our foreparents, our mothers and our fathers, that I believe has enabled us to survive this trauma and this abuse, this discrimination that we continue to endure. And to
Mm-hmm.
the extent that we survive, and we will, it'll be because of our faith in God, I believe,
That's
because we're
right.
resilient people.
My great grandparents might have known your grandparents because they migrated from Saluda, South Carolina to 237 57th Place, Northeast Washington, D.C.
Mm.
So
Who knows?
they
Could have
might have
been.
known. Yeah, it could have been. We've got to go to commercial break, but before we do, Karen, tell everyone where they can find your book.
Well, thank you for asking. You can get my book at gcgoodencenter.com. Go there and go to the library. I have an online bookstore, gcgoodencenter.com, and you'll be able to order the books, all of my books there, but especially They Came Across Saltwater.
That's wonderful. Folks, I want you to stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages here on Sirius XM Radio, Channel 141, HUR Voices. And we're back here on Skin Deep with my sorority sister, Karen Williams Gooden, attorney, author, and historian. So, Karen, I wanted to ask you some more about the book. What are some of the historical periods in American history that you address in your book that impacts your family?
Well, I think one of the primary eras would be Reconstruction. I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that because it was a pivotal point in the Black community. It was short lived, though, from 1865, and some people argue all the way through 1901. But the earlier date end is probably like 1890 or thereabout. But I mentioned that period because I had a great uncle. His name was Isaac, great great uncle, who was born in 1830, an enslaved man who rose to become a state senator, if you can believe
Mm,
that, in North
mm,
Carolina.
yeah.
He also founded a school. In addition to that, he used his wherewithal and his contacts in the legislature to ultimately be a part, at least a catalyst for the founding of A&T State University. In
Mm,
1890, he introduced the bill, Senate Bill 12, because by that time a federal act had been passed, the Morrill Act, which required now Southern states to start universities for the newly freed African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Isaac Austin introduced that bill, I have a composite of him, and he's the only African American, as you can imagine, in the 1890 session of the North Carolina Senate. And the bottom line is that, of course, they voted against it. They're like, we're not
Mm-hmm. Of
supposed to,
course.
we voting against you. But there was
Mm-hmm.
a white man, his colleague, Dr. Bellamy, who, on the other hand, told them, look, if we don't start this school for them, they might have to come to school with us, and we don't want that. So he
Mm-hmm.
introduces the same bill. They voted up, and therein is how A&T State University is born. But I have collaborated with the historian at the Bellamy Mansion Museum in Wilmington, North Carolina, and she has reviewed portions of my manuscript, and I did hers, and she agreed that she would have to give credit, was happy to give credit to Isaac Austin and one Congressman O'Hara, who had been a senator at the time, that they were also responsible for the founding and establishment of one of our greatest HBCUs, A&T State University. So
Oh,
Reconstruction was a great era that
yes,
impacted
yes.
our community.
And post Reconstruction politics, you in chapter 18, you mention a man named John Epps Hubbard. Tell my listeners about him and what impact he had in Cleveland during the Great Depression.
Well, John Epps Hubbard is very special to me. He is my great uncle, but he is, of course, my paternal uncle, my father's uncle, my grandmother's brother. And he was quite an unusual man. He really is named for John Wales. And I
Mm,
mention that because John Wales was what? The father of Martha Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's wife.
right. Mm-hmm.
But John Wells had two white wives, but he had a concubine, and people are not to be offended by that term because we use those terms as they may be appropriate for the time frame. And at that time, she could not have been his common law wife because we were not at law anything, right? We were
Right.
chattel
That's right.
property. But in any event, he had six black children with Elizabeth Hemings, one being Sally Hemings. And
Mm-hmm.
so through the lineage of my research, I determined that we descend directly from John Wells, Elizabeth Hemings, Thomas Jefferson, and Sally Hemings. And so I argue that my uncle probably was greatly influenced indirectly by knowing or having relatives who were active in politics because he would go on to move to Cleveland, Ohio, where he became the second African American to sit on the Cleveland City Council. I asked myself, well, why in the world did Uncle John even go to Ohio? What led him there? Because Ohio had been the hotbed of abolitionism, and
Yeah.
a lot of abolitionists went to Ohio. And in addition to that, Madison Hemings, who was one of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson's sons, ultimately moved to Pikes County, which is very near to where John Hubbard moved. And I think he was there because he knew he had relatives there. But
Yeah.
ultimately, he goes over and he then becomes a great civil rights leader. Long before it was popular to be as such, he could have passed for convenience. And I deal with that topic in my book. I deal
Mm,
with very uncomfortable topics.
yeah.
And but Hubbard decided that he would fight for women's rights. He fought for anti-lynching legislation, and I've got to tell you, I really didn't realize until I began to study the work of my uncle and the Govan Sweat Ward lynching that I didn't realize that the Emmett Till anti-lynching law was just passed under Biden. But others like John Hubbard and Walter White of the NAACP had fought for anti-lynching laws. And finally, he was a media founder. He founded the Hubbard News Agency and wrote about the disenfranchised Black community and was also a great love of education. Sent my father's two cousins, first cousins, to Howard University. On that side, John Matthew Hubbard would be the first in our family to finish Howard University in 1936.
Wow. That's just jaw dropping. Like this kind of information that you have about your family and that you're going to pass down, that you have passed down to your children, it is just simply phenomenal, just amazing. I know you mentioned that you are related to Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. What other national figures are you related to, and how did you discover that?
Well, I also found that I'm related to a wonderful woman named Ella Fitzgerald, and I
Mm-hmm.
found that out when I was in college. It was some would say not necessarily a pleasant experience, but my grandmother, the same grandmother I mentioned, Lucinda, who
Hmm.
took me to the lynching tree. We talked there almost every day. And so I told her, I said, she said, baby, what you doing today? I said, well, I'm going to see this famous lady. She said, who are you going to see, baby? I said, I'm going to see Ella Fitzgerald. I was so excited. She said, well, baby, when you get there, you tell her that she's my first cousin. I said, your first cousin, grandma? She
Wow.
said, yes. She said, my mama was named Minerva Winnie Williams Austin. Her mother was Tempe. Aunt Tempe is how she described it. So anyway, I get in the
Wow.
line after it's over to see Miss Fitzgerald. And when I tell her, I'm all excited. I'm a college co-ed. Her response isn't what I might have imagined. And she said,
Hmm.
listen, I'm not going to discuss anything with you. If you don't get out of this line, I may have to call my security detail. And I
Oh,
said, Miss Mitchell, you don't have to do that. But you don't have to do that. So I ran. I literally ran back to my my office, to my dormitory rather.
oh,
When I got to my room, I called grandma and she was excited. She said, did you see Ella? I said, I kind of did, grandma. She said, well, how's she doing? So I told her, she said, Ella ought to be shamed. But I want to vindicate Miss Fitzgerald. Not that she needs vindication, because she was the mother of jazz. She was a great musician, and I am still proud of the great work she did, because as it turns out, she had had a very difficult childhood. And my
oh,
grandmother didn't know about that. She was
okay.
left nearly homeless, and she auditioned uh, at the uh, at the Apollo Theater, and I understand many of the Harlem Renaissance greats were there, and they signed her up. And so she didn't know me from Adam, and she
Yeah.
didn't know what my motives were, and she may not have wanted me to know those things. But clearly, my mother's first cousin, the son of my grandmother's baby sister, talked to me and told me, I'm not sure if I Canella did that. She started me in my career. He said I worked with some of the greatest jazz artists, and his name is Hugh Brody, and he too is documented in the book. He worked with Illinois Jacquet. He worked with Duke Ellington and the like. So my family had ties to the Harlem Renaissance. And that's not to suggest that there's some perfect family and that we didn't have trials and struggles, because I discussed the whole gamut. But these are
Yeah.
some of the highlights, and these are some of the folks to whom I was related.
Yes. Yes. It's important to let people know that every family has things that they may
Dysfunction.
not want discussed, that they're not so proud of, or there was trauma or whatever. So you just never know. How did you feel when you discovered that you were related to US President Thomas Jefferson?
Well, you know what, I thought about a conversation I had with my dad. My mother used to always say, Daddy didn't talk about his history as much, but he gave me enough clues. And if one reads the book more closely, you'll see some of those. But he told me this. He said, Karen, relative to our relations to Europeans or Caucasians, he said, you should neither be proud or ashamed. It's just
Mm-hmm.
a fact that is. And so that's kind of how I view that. I would say that relative to Thomas Jefferson, Sharon, my emotions would be at best mixed. Let's think about it. He
Yes, of
was the
course.
third president of the United States. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, a lofty document. Sounds great. You like words, I like words. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights to life, liberty. But it didn't apply to us
That's right.
at that time. So that's problematic.
Yeah.
You own
His own
600
children.
his own children. And now he loved books. And so my husband and I, my husband's taken me to seven, I think, out of the nine plantations from which I descended. He's driven me to all these places. So he has
Wow.
been just a gem. But when we went to Monticello, what was interesting is that it's a beautiful place. But at the end of the day, we built it, and he had 600 enslaved Africans. He
Mm.
loved books, and when the 1812 war took place and the Library of Congress was burned, he sold a lot of his books back, because he was a man who didn't have a lot of money. He inherited a lot of debt from
Mm-hmm.
his father-in-law, John Wells, but
Mm-hmm.
he lived large.
Yeah.
But having said that, my emotions are mixed, because yes, he founded the University of Virginia, but my people couldn't go there.
Right.
Our people couldn't go there. Yes, he also was an ambassador to France. I used to have this deep love for Paris, France. I couldn't imagine why. There was really no reason, because I don't like cities, but I have a point I want to make about this, and it's this. my in-laws said, "Well, where do you want to go on your honeymoon?" And I told my husband, "I want to go to Paris, France." Of course, he said, "Okay, well, that's where we're going," and we did. So I loved going to the Champs Elysees, but not to shop. I just always wanted to go there, and I would each time we've been. But as it turns out, Sharon, Thomas Jefferson started his relationship with Sally Hemings at the La Longueuil Hotel on the Champs Elysees when she was 14 and he was 44.
That's
He
painful. That's
returned. It's
painful,
very
Karen.
painful. So when we went to the Olympics last year, my husband said, "You don't have to tell me. I already know. We are going to the Champs Elysees. I'm going to take you to the La Longueuil Hotel." Now, the hotel itself doesn't still exist, but the building is there. And there's a memorial or plaque commemorating the fact that Thomas Jefferson lived there. But there's no mention of Sally Hemings. So there's a
Mm,
picture of me in the book touching the wall and how I felt, how she must have felt
how she
50
must have
years
felt. She
ago.
was a child. She was a
She was a
child.
child, and so this issue of what was that relationship like? There was no issue of consent
That's right.
relative to sex on the plantation. You
She
weren't
was
property.
she was his property. Yeah.
And
Oh,
so, yep,
Karen.
that's it. That's what
Yeah.
happened. And so I was there, and it was a moving experience. So my emotions about him are mixed because, of course, he's intelligent, presumptively so, a lawyer, wrote all these things, but enslaved my people. So, there's no love lost there.
Yeah. We'll have to pick this up again. Maybe we'll get back together on the show in a month or so, because I find all of this information heartwarming, fascinating, and painful all at the same time. So I just can't thank you enough for being a guest here. Tell us one more time how people can reach out to you or find your book.
Thank you so much again, Sharon. I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be here. You can get my book by going to gcgoodencenter, one word.com, and click on the online bookstore and order your copy of They Came Across Saltwater. And thank you again so much for this opportunity. Sorrow.
That's it for now, folks. I'm your host, Sharon Morton, with my brilliant guest, Karen Williams Gooden. Folks, I hope that you take the information that we provided today and use it to grow your history. You can hear this show on SiriusXM Radio Channel 141 on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, as well as on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and all the streaming platforms. And hit me up at skindeepradioshow@gmail.com if you have a show idea, or check me out at Sharon_Morton on Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for tuning in on all things that are skin deep.